Hi there, it's November the 2nd and we're continuing our progress through the letter to Hebrews, and we're in chapter 4, we're reading the whole chapter from verses 1 to 16. The writer has been focusing in on the issue of faith with his readers and maybe their lack of faith. They're missing out on the faith that they really need, and this tendency they have to unbelief. And in this chapter, the writer opens up by saying this is going to lead to them missing out. They're going to miss out on the provision that God has made for them for a salvation, and the big word here in this chapter is for a resting. Now, it's important to notice that the word here used in the Greek for rest here is a word katapavsis. It has in it the word pause, which is where our word pause comes from, pavsis. But katapavsis means a complete resting, a complete desisting. Now, it's quoting here from Psalm 95, verse 11, and in the original Hebrew of Psalm 95:11, the word there used, where katapavsis is used in the Greek version of the Old Testament, is the word menucha. Now, menucha is a very important word in Hebrew. It means rest, but it means settled rest. And here particularly it's talking about the people going into the promised land, because in this psalm it's recalling the fact that in Numbers, when the people were about to go into the land, or when the spies had brought back a report of the land and the fact that God could take them in, the people said no, they weren't going in because of the giants. And God said to them, then you will not enter my menucha. This generation will not enter my rest. It will not enter my settlement. So it's about a settled place. It's interesting that in Psalm 23, the same word is used, al me menuchot, by waters of settlement, by waters of calm, by waters of stopping and relaxing and resting. So the writer here to the Hebrews is concerned that people are going to miss out on something just like Israel did, because they weren't going into the promised land. They stepped back. So there's a danger that the people here are going to miss out actually on the provision of heaven, which Jesus has pushed into by his blood, by his sacrifice. Jesus has gone into the very presence of God, and there's a fear here of them missing out on the presence of God. The writer says, after all, God has completed his work. God rested from his labor. And there's an invitation to us to stop fighting, to stop wrestling, to stop striving to please God. Because just as God has rested, Jesus invites us into a place of trust. But what wars against this is the whole thing of unbelief. And so the writer to the Hebrews again reminds them that if they hear God's voice today, don't harden your hearts, don't turn away from him, but come into this place of rest. And he's saying it's clear that Joshua isn't that this isn't talking about just the natural, talking about a Sabbath, talking about the day of Sabbath, because this happens after Joshua brought them into the promised land. But there still is, according to the psalmist, a menucha. There's still a katapavsis to come, which is what Jesus has brought us through his life and through his sacrifice. And the writer is encouraging them to listen to God's word, because he said God's word will cut through all this. God's word is sharper than a double-edged sword, and it divides between soul and spirit, divides between those things which are natural, the religious observances, and the spirit, which is that which comes from God. And so the writer says there is actually, and he uses another word here in Greek. The only time this word is used in the Greek scriptures, there is a sabbatismos, and this sabbatismos literally means a sabbathizing. There is a practice of Sabbath. There is a practice of rest, which is still available to us, which is not about observing the seventh day. It's not about resting. It's not about the practical thing. It's actually about the coming into the presence of God through the sacrifice of Jesus and coming forward, because Jesus is the high priest. He's the one who's gone before us, who the writer says, sympathizes, sympathise. He knows everything about us and he feels with us. That's what that word means. It's not like our word sympathy. This means he feels with us, like a compassion. He feels with us because he's been there. And so this is why we have to push through, and we can, and this beautiful verse at the end of chapter 4 where it says we can come boldly to the throne of grace because Jesus has gone there for us. We may receive mercy, we may receive grace in the time we need it because God has opened up this way for us, this katapasis, this menucha, this coming into the promised land of God's grace through the high priesthood of Jesus. What an amazing offer this is for us today, that we don't have to strive, we don't have to go through the motions continually, that through Jesus we are allowed into the presence of God and we are invited to come into this menucha, into this rest, into this place of settlement, into this place of calm because of what Jesus has done. Have a very restful November the 2nd.